All right, a good Tuesday to you. Glad you're checking in with Forecasting with Friends. I'm Fox 26 meteorologist John Dawson, and kind of a big day in the tropical weather world. Not huge, but at least I've been keeping an eye, waiting for the 10 a.m. hour this morning for the X, formerly known as Twitter, because Colorado State University releasing their June update for their seasonal outlook. And so we're going to take a look at those numbers here in just a second. But what happens is with the Colorado State University, they release an April forecast, and then they release a June, a July, as well as an August update. And of course, just like with any forecast, when you're getting closer to the event, let's say it was a weekend forecast or something, as you get closer, you know the accuracy is going to be better, but you still, in a sense, kind of want to know that outlook a little bit on what you're expecting. So that's kind of what their process is. They, again, release an April one, which is very early, and they realize that it's very early. And the confidence in it is, you know, expecting it to be not as accurate as what the August forecast might look like. And every April at the National Tropical Weather Conference, which is held in South Padre Island. I've had an opportunity to present at that conference the last 3 years. At that conference as well, Dr. Phil Klotzbach from Colorado State University, who's the one who's in charge of this forecast, he presents that April forecast at that conference. And so this is the big day for the update. So let's take a look at the graphics and see that the reveal shows it's exactly the same. And I'm not going to lie to you, I was a little disappointed this morning. I was a little disappointed because I've been waiting for at least a solid 48 hours to get the update on what Dr. Klotzbach is going to do with his June update for his forecast, and it's exactly the same. So, I don't know, just a little bit disappointed that there wasn't a number changed or different in some capacity or another. Not that I'm rooting for a very busy season or anything like that. It's very obvious. All the factors are indicating that it looks like it will be a very busy season. So not necessarily disappointed that we're looking for lower numbers or busy or not. But like I said, I just kind of was thinking that maybe we would have one or two numbers different instead of being completely identical. But compared there to your last column, which is the average season when you go back to our records from 1991 to 2020, which again, that's how the National Weather Service always considers an average when they look at a 30-year, the last 30 years is what they consider average. So this isn't going back to our complete, record books or anything like that, but it does have the numbers, as you can tell, much higher than usual. Now, as I mentioned, at the National Tropical Weather Conference, I was able to talk to Dr. Philip Klotzbach, and I think we're going to be able to see part of that interview now. Again, this took place in April, so this is a little bit dated, but not completely dated, because really he's going to be able to describe the factors that go into these types of forecasts, and especially describe the factors of what they're looking at this season, especially since it's going to be such higher numbers.
Yeah, so as you mentioned last year, when we put out all of our forecasts, and even like Noah, they said, the uncertainty with this year is high because we have these two big contrasting forces, the El Nino and the really warm Atlantic. Whereas this year, instead of having them kind of going against each other, they're both pulling the same direction. We still have the very warm Atlantic, but now we anticipate we're going to be seeing La Nina conditions for this summer and fall. So La Nina is colder water in the eastern and central tropical Pacific, generally making for more hurricane favorable conditions in the Atlantic.
Okay, and I always have to take a minute and think about that. So I'm going to say that again just so we can all sort of remember. The El Nino is not so many hurricanes. The La Nina is more hurricanes. But I'm going to kind of consider this that almost a transitional year because we're going from one to another. And I'm trying to remember somewhere, I think I've read or I've heard about that, like, that's not a really good year for Texas when you transition like that. Is it? Am I making that up, or does history kind of again make that look not so favorable?
I mean, it's hard to say because we don't have a ton of great El Nino data going back in time, and it's a little bit unclear because some years the transition the atmosphere responds quicker to the transition than other years. So we're already seeing some signs that the atmosphere is already responding more like neutral and even starting to look a little more La Nina-ish depending on exactly where you look. So we anticipate the transition probably happening relatively quickly because while the water temperatures are still fairly warm in the tropical Pacific, right beneath the surface, the water temperatures are actually quite a bit colder than normal. And we anticipate kind of some of that colder water to be coming up to the surface probably in the next month or two. So I think we're going to see a fairly fast transition over to La Nina. La Nina does tend to increase the odds of landfalls somewhat for Texas, but the biggest increase is actually for Florida up to Maine. You tend to see a much higher risk of landfalls in La Nina relative to El Nino.
Yeah, I totally noticed. I was watching quite closely in your graphics that you were showing this morning that the Texas to Alabama numbers were lower than the Florida up to the coast numbers for that East Coast. So as someone from Texas, I was appreciative to see numbers that were a little bit like that for sure. So talk a little bit about those big factors that you look at when determining, we talked about the sea surface temperature. What are those big factors you look at when determining a forecast for an outlook like this?
Yeah, so we already went through the Atlantic water temperatures, the El Nino. We also look at things, especially in early April, we're looking at kind of some model projections and predictions for, what may happen during the season. So we're not looking at the models to predict the number of hurricanes, but okay, what are the models forecasting for the environment during the season? So we look at what they're predicting for water temperatures, but also forecasts of shear, forecasts of precipitation, things like that. And so, 20, 30 years ago, the models really didn't have any skill at that, but now they do. They're not perfect, but they can give us reasonable forecasts, say for, a month average, not for any particular day, but okay, we're here in early April. What is the forecast for, say, August or for September for like the average shear? And that's one of the reasons I think last year, while there was kind of this big uncertainty with the season, the climate model said we should see El Nino, we should see a very, very warm Atlantic, and we should see low shear, which is one of the reasons why we forecast an above normal season despite the strong El Nino. Normally we would say that means a quiet season regardless, but because the model said warm Atlantic, El Nino, still low shear, we said, okay, this is going to behave differently than your normal El Nino, and it certainly did.
Okay, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there was definitely a feeling that I got that your models and a lot of the evidence that you would use to create the forecast are actually higher numbers than what you're putting out. So tell me a little bit about why you didn't go with higher numbers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the forecast we're going with is quite an active season. There's still, there's a lot of uncertainty. It's still April. A lot can change between now and June, and especially when the season really ramps up in August. So one reason is, we've actually seen the Atlantic relative to normal cool a little bit the last few weeks, so I wanted to put a little bit of a damper on things there, but also just there is a lot of uncertainty at this lead time. Now, if the same guidance is pointing for those same numbers, and we're talking in June or July, then maybe those numbers would go up. Alternatively, if that little bit of cooling we've observed in the Atlantic recently, if, say, the Atlantic doesn't warm up as fast as we anticipate, then maybe the numbers would come down.
And once again, you're with Colorado State University, and you worked with Dr. Gray. And is it fair to say Dr. Gray invented the seasonal outlook?
Yeah, he definitely did for the Atlantic. Dr. Gray was the first one to do these seasonal forecasts, and I think he was pretty much the only one doing them for at least the first, say, 10 to 12 years of doing these forecasts. So, prior to when he started doing it, I think Neil Frank was quoted in the early 80s saying there's no way to know how busy the hurricane season is going to be. And, some years, that's true. We've definitely had some busts, but in general, Dr. Gray pioneered this effort, and we've continued to do it. So this is the start of our 41st year of doing seasonal hurricane forecasts.
Great, and I do want you to tell one story about that, and I don't think I remember hearing, I think maybe I did hear this one time before, that that August the 20th was the day. Tell us about the Dr. Gray and the August the 20th date.
Yeah, so August 20th, every year Dr. Gray used to ring a bell, a physical bell, and basically that was to signal the active part of the Atlantic hurricane season. And so the reason why August 20th is kind of a magical date is because up through the middle part of August, the Atlantic tends to be fairly dry. You get a lot of dust coming off of Africa. Even though your shear tends to be fairly low, say in late July through August, it takes a little while for the tropical Atlantic to get moist enough to basically be able to support these strong thunderstorms. August 20th is about the time the season really ramps up. So you have warm water, generally a low shear, and the tropical Atlantic has enough moisture, it's not so dry anymore. So around August 20th is about when that occurs. And so Dr. Gray used to ring a bell every year. We still ring the bell every year in his honor. And certainly it worked out very well last year. The bell rang, and we had, I believe, 6 storms form between between August 20th and the end of the month, and 13 storms between August 20th and September 28th.
Yeah, it's like y'all really started the race last year with your bell. And us folks here in the Houston area, we certainly realize that things can happen in August. But I also want to point out what we always bring up, that no matter what, with the as far as the number of storms in a forecast, the preparations are always there. You always want to be prepared because us folks in Houston know that in 1983 there were 4 storms total.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, 1983 was one of the deadest years on record. 4 storms total. First storm didn't form until late August, and obviously the Hurricane Alicia was quite impactful for the city of Houston.
Okay, folks want to find you. Is X the best way to, Twitter X the best way to find you?
Yeah, if you can find me on Twitter, that's the best way to find me. I try to post a fair amount of content, especially as the season starts to ramp up.
All right, great. Again, Dr. Phil Klotzbach, we are at the National Tropical Weather Conference in South Padre Island. You can find him on social media, and we'll be looking for you on Fox Local and fox26houston.com as well.
Okay, so just a reminder, Dr. Klotzbach and myself wearing matching shirts there because we were at the same conference, and that was shirt day, where you all wear the same shirt. It wasn't a coincidence. Again, that was from April when we were at the National Tropical Weather Conference, that interview. So here is the June update, which happens to be the same thing that was in April, compared and put next to the NOAA forecast. Remember, they released theirs the last week of May, and you'll notice they're pretty much the same. NOAA gives a little bit of a range. Colorado State University gives some specific numbers, but well above those seasonal averages, and I think right about a little bit more even active than what we saw last year, which last year was considered an active season, and then these numbers are even higher than that as well. All right, coming up after our short break, I have an interview with the National Weather Service here locally in Houston and Galveston, a real forecasting friend that I've been able to work with over the years. His name is Lance Wood, and again, he's the it's something science officer. I never get his title right. He's going to be able to tell you his title though, but he's one of the folks down at the National Weather Service in Houston and Galveston, and we'll have that interview coming up after this break.
Fox 26 is The Fox 26 YouTube page. Like and subscribe today.
All right, welcome back to Forecasting with Friends. I'm meteorologist John Dawson, and we do have a friend today here for real. This is Lance Wood, and Lance is down at the National Weather Service office here in the Houston, Galveston area and has been here for a while. And I'm excited to be able to talk to my friends in the weather community. And Lance and I have been working together for a long time because we've both been around Houston for a long time. So Lance, let me just give you an opportunity to give an introduction and kind of give your details on title and responsibilities there at the Weather Service.
Sure. Yeah, it's great to talk with you today, John. I'm the Science and Operations Officer here with the National Weather Service office. I've been in that role since, I guess, late 2006, and I've been a forecaster, senior forecaster here before that since the late 90s, and actually grew up in Houston. So I've been around Houston weather a long time, and forecasting the weather a long time as well. What I do currently is kind of like try to bring the latest and greatest science and research into operations and do some training as well.
Let's just start. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this because it's pretty well known that everyone's expecting a busy hurricane season. But just your thoughts on, what do you think about all these high numbers that are coming out for our seasonal outlooks?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. There's a lot of agreement there, and I'm in agreement with that as well. Pretty much very unlikely to not have an above normal season. I mean, the cards are stacked in our favor for that with the warm sea surface temperatures, very above normal out there. And again, as the other main driver in the climate is the transitioning to a La Nina. So those two things together, from what we know about seasonal forecasting, points to a lot of storms, especially as we get into, the peak of our season, August and September.
And I'm glad you brought that up with August and September, because obviously we're in June right now. And I think the La Nina transition is not really a big impact on June, in my opinion. Number one, we haven't quite got there yet, but also it's really the warm waters in the Gulf. And we've been talking about maybe seeing something sort of tropical like next week in the forecast. So at this point, we're kind of continuing here at Fox 26. We're sticking with the term a Gulf low is kind of what we're sticking with, because we think it's generic enough and doesn't sound too overly threatening, but also accurate as far as what it might turn out being. So that's as common though for this time of the year. So talk to us a little bit about what happens in June in the Gulf of Mexico and really how it impacts us here in Houston.
Yeah, once we get these kind of warm, moist air masses and we get the flow off of the Gulf, June is a month where we typically get a decent amount of rainfall. We can also see some tropical waves, that are kind of moving across the Caribbean, and we have to watch those. There are times where we get kind of a broad area of low pressure that can develop for, say, a week or two, kind of around the Yucatan, the Northwest Caribbean, and into the Bay of Campeche there, that southern part of the Gulf. And when that broad area of low pressure forms, it's really broad. I mean, it's just a general area. We kind of watch to see if anything smaller within it can develop into a tropical cyclone. And that's probably the situation that it looks like kind of next week. We know pressure is going to be low kind of throughout the Gulf. And so we're just kind of monitoring. Like I said, if thunderstorms stay in the same area long enough with the pressure already being low, could something develop and do we need to watch for tropical cyclone development? So still looks to me like a week out before, we have that threat.
Yeah, certainly there is some time. And with this much distance, I don't get real excited about where things are going, because the models continue to kind of take things different directions, but certainly it does seem like there will be something trying to form. And so far, at least, indications are it would remain relatively weak, so that we're not talking about a big old hurricane or anything. It would be relatively weak, not so organized. But certainly it could be a rainmaker, right? This is the time of year that we can see that.
Yeah, whether or not you get development or not on the tropical cyclone side, we could definitely see an increase in moisture, and definitely could have some heavy rain to contend with. but you're right. It's we're kind of in that when we get in that past a week or about a week out, it is very hard to get specific. I'm glad you brought up that it doesn't look like anything too strong, like a big hurricane. That's generally pretty unlikely in June in the Gulf. It's not unprecedented, but unlikely. Much more likely to see more like a depression or tropical storm in the Western Gulf than a big powerful hurricane, at least in June.
Tropical Storm Allison. For those who weren't in the Houston area in 2001, we had a This is kind of this is the Harvey before Harvey was here. It was a Tropical Storm Allison and just dropped feet of rain across the Houston area. And let me just let you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, about 3 feet of rain instead of 4 to 5 feet of rain like we got in Harvey. But Allison was a smaller footprint, but of heavy rainfall, but very significant, especially in like Northeast Houston, downtown. I think as much as 38 inches of rain fell just northeast of Houston. And it was really, it was a drawn out event. It came inland on the 5th, drifted up to Lufkin, stalled. It was blocked by high pressure, not unlike Harvey, which also got blocked, and then kind of backtracked to the south into the Houston area. And then the real devastating event happened, a few days later after landfall, on the 8th into the 9th. It was an overnight into the morning event on the weekend. I'll never forget, it was a Friday night into Saturday morning. And that's when I believe over 20 inches of rain fell quickly in the Houston area, and of course flooded the medical center. It just caused a lot of damage. And unfortunately, some people lost their lives in that flood as well.
Yeah, I do remember that Saturday morning event. It was something that was, again, catching a lot of people off guard as far as you just kind of woke up Saturday morning and all this had fallen Friday and into Friday night. So, but I do think it kind of is representative a little bit about that June pattern again, right? Where you just have this fairly disorganized, although that was technically a tropical storm. And so on the weaker side of things, wind-wise, and a rainmaker and sort of wandering a little bit. And that's kind of what we've seen.
It developed really quickly. I remember the tropical weather outlook, like early that morning, it developed right off our coast, I believe about 80 miles or so off of the Southeast Texas coast. And that tropical weather outlook wasn't even sure if development was going to occur. And then that morning on June 5th, it got its act together. It got some strong winds on the east side, but it was actually kind of asymmetrical. There wasn't much on the west side. It kind of looked like a comma on the satellite imagery. And actually, you could argue it was somewhat subtropical at first. It didn't look purely tropical. So it wasn't that well organized, but the winds did come up, became a tropical storm, and moved inland around Freeport. But it happened quickly. That's the thing that we were talking about. It formed right off our coast. And when you look at development regions in June, it's generally like the Northwest Caribbean or it's the Gulf of Mexico. So June systems, you're not going to have a lot of time to watch.
Fox 26 is The Fox 26 YouTube page. Like and subscribe today.
All right, welcome back to Forecasting with Friends. Glad you're here. This is the portion when we talk about what's happening today across Southeast Texas and, of course, what's going to be happening. It's the forecast for what we've got happening. And I think today will be a similar pattern to yesterday in the fact that we certainly could see some storms, but they'll really be a lot later than you're expecting, or really what you would think to have happen in the afternoon. And we can kind of see this cluster of storms getting organized. We're going to look at a futurecast here in a minute and sort of talk about how they're trying to head down towards us. We've got a little bit of stable air that's still in place. Ozone Action Day are the gray counties that we've got highlighted there. Temperature-wise, we're in the mid to the upper 80s. We're also at 90 degrees already for our friends out in Sugar Land. And here's that futurecast I was talking about with the addition of the Storm Prediction Center severe weather outlook. So again, this lighter green, that's stormy weather, but not a severe storm. And then this darker shading is that 1 out of 5 threat. So it's possible, but maybe not favored or likely as much. And you can see on the timing, this is 10 o'clock tonight when they're starting to creep into the Houston area. The stronger storms are expected to be out further to the west of San Antonio. Again, that's that yellow shading showing that next level up from the Storm Prediction Center as the possibility. And here's that futurecast where we keep things pretty quiet this morning and even in the early afternoon hours, but then those storms begin to pop up somewhat later in the day, and we're still watching that system to see if it can kind of move in, if it can hold itself together as we move into the end of the 7-day, as we move into the end of the futurecast. 7-day forecast keeps the rain chances for today and tomorrow. Then we're going to dry things out towards the end of the week. We're watching the Gulf of Mexico at the end of the weekend.